The confederation of superior species sat in their grand chamber, a ring of shimmering crystal seats suspended above a swirling vortex of stardust. Below, the vast expanse of galactic space stretched in infinite blackness, a stark contrast to the bustling life of their advanced empire. Species from all corners of the galaxy, each far more powerful than Earthlings could ever hope to be, observed the proceedings with detached curiosity. The Council's chairperson, a towering alien from the gas giant Neb, raised his tendrils in a formal gesture. His voice echoed like a deep rumble in the chamber, filling the vastness of the space. We are convened today to address the petition of the human planet, Earth. After decades of peaceful yet limited coexistence, they request full independence. They seek to sever ties with the Confederation and chart their own course. He paused, casting a glance at the small hologram floating beside him. An image of Earth, its blue oceans and green continents hanging like a fragile jewel against the cold backdrop of space. The sight seemed almost quaint. Earth, a mere dot compared to the stars, to the sprawling empires that now govern the galaxy. Let us be clear, the chairperson continued. This decision will affect not just Earth, but the entire structure of our galactic order. Should we grant them autonomy, they will be free to pursue their own path, unmonitored, unregulated. A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Representatives from various species, each vastly superior to humanity in intellect and power, exchanged glances. Most were indifferent, some entertained by the novelty of such a request, but a few wore expressions of quiet disdain. The humans had always been unpredictable, stubborn, and far too emotional for the Confederation's tastes. An elderly diplomat, Ambassador Klein, stood up at the far end of the chamber. Her sharp features remained serene, though there was an undeniable fire in her eyes. As a representative of Earth, she had earned the privilege of addressing the tribunal. The assembly fell silent. I am aware that many here see us as little more than a curiosity, she began, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made it impossible to ignore. You believe we are simply a juvenile species, ripe for your manipulation and control. But you are wrong. We are not here for your pity, nor are we seeking permission to leave. Earth requests only one thing: the freedom to determine our own future. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, locking onto each of the alien representatives. I ask only that you allow us to depart. But know this: in doing so, you will make a grave mistake. You may permit us to leave, but you will regret it. The council exchanged uneasy glances. The words hung in the air, and for the first time, something shifted. With a slow, deliberate motion, the chairperson lowered his tendrils and spoke. Earth will be permitted to depart. But mark my words, Earthlings, we will be watching. If you threaten the order of the galaxy, we will return. And we will do what must be done. Ambassador Klein nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible smile crossing her lips. Months passed after the tribunal's decision, and the galaxy slowly settled into its routine. The Confederation's leadership barely noticed as Earth's communications and trade routes began to fade into silence. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Earth's departure was expected to be messy, perhaps with a few skirmishes or protests from discontented factions. But ultimately, the humans would implode under their own inability to sustain such a radical shift. But as the weeks turned into months, the nothingness of Earth's exit began to unsettle the galactic powers. Ships were no longer appearing in Federation trade lanes. Earth's colonies in nearby sectors had gone quiet, and surveillance stations near Earth were left unmanned, abandoned without warning. The Confederation assumed it was just a temporary lapse, a signal glitch in the deep expanse of space. There was no cause for alarm. Yet, even as their surveillance systems returned to full functionality, reports trickled in that something strange was happening. A fleet of human ships, sleek and unmarked, had been spotted in the outer reaches of the galaxy, deep within the neutral zone. What had once been clunky, poorly designed warships now moved with surprising fluidity, silently jumping from one star system to the next, disappearing as quickly as they arrived. No communication, no warning, no trace. The first disappearance was reported from a Confederate merchant freighter, the Glory of Stora. It vanished without a trace just as it was about to cross into a heavily guarded hyperspace corridor near the Arendine belt. The ship's last transmission was a garbled distress call, a warning that something was hunting them. The transmission ended abruptly, and no wreckage was ever found. That same week, several small trade vessels went dark in the same region. Then, a mining colony on the edge of the Milky Way sent a frantic distress signal before the transmission cut off entirely. The Confederation dispatched a small scouting fleet to investigate, expecting a simple pirate raid or some kind of accident. What they found, however, would change everything. The scout ships arrived to find the entire colony's population gone. Not a single soul remained. Instead, the wreckage of the colony was eerily pristine, untouched by typical destruction. The only signs of violence were the cold, alien signatures of weapons far beyond the Confederation's arsenal, a weapon that warped reality itself. The Confederation's top intelligence agents analyzed the remains of the wreckage and discovered something impossible. The energy signatures on the site matched no known technology, nothing remotely close to anything the Confederation had developed. But it did match something vaguely familiar: human technology. It was impossible. Humans had been primitive, their military forces weak and outdated. How could they have advanced so far so quickly? The panic began to spread through the higher echelons of the Confederation. Something was happening. And it wasn't just Earth's retreat. It was as though the entire planet had vanished, only to be replaced with something far more dangerous. The Confederation, once so confident in its superiority, was now on high alert. Rumors swirled through the diplomatic channels. Human fleets, cloaked in silence, were striking with surgical precision. One by one, Confederate outposts fell, each disappearing into the void without a hint of the attacker's identity. The Confederation's most trusted fleets were deployed in an effort to chase down these elusive threats. But no one could keep up with the mysterious human ships that seemed to phase in and out of existence. It was on the desolate world of Uzkur, at the very edge of Confederate-controlled space, that the first definitive confrontation occurred. A Confederate fleet, led by Admiral Korath, was dispatched to investigate after receiving a distress signal from the planet's primary research facility. What they found was nothing short of horrifying. The moment the fleet entered the system, they realized something was wrong. Yizkur's skies, once filled with the dull hum of industry, were empty. The research stations, which had been the cornerstone of the Confederation's technological development in the region, lay in ruins. But it wasn't just the destruction that unnerved them. It was the lack of destruction. Buildings were reduced to their skeletal frames, yet there was no sign of the violent bombardment or energy weapons the Confederation typically used in a military strike. Instead, the wreckage was clean, as if someone had erased everything with a precision that went beyond warfare. As Admiral Korath's fleet moved closer, a shiver ran through his command deck. His ships were surrounded by an eerie stillness. No signals, no signs of life. It was as if the entire planet had been emptied, wiped clean of all existence. And then came the signal. A single encrypted message blared through the fleet's communication system, its content strange and haunting. "You cannot outrun us. We remember what you did." Before the Admiral could respond, the comms were flooded with static. It was the beginning of a wave of bizarre attacks. Suddenly, the fleet's radar systems exploded into chaos. A series of small, sleek human ships, each one barely larger than a fighter, materialized out of nowhere, darting in and out of the fabric of space itself. They struck quickly, devastating the Confederate vessels with weapons that disrupted both matter and energy at the quantum level. The Confederation's advanced shields, designed to withstand the most powerful strikes, were useless. Each ship seemed to twist, warp, and flicker, as if they were not bound by the same rules of physics. Admiral Korath's fleet was torn apart in mere minutes. The human ships vanished as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving behind nothing but the remains of what had once been a mighty fleet. The Confederation was left with nothing. They had no idea how the humans had gained such power, or how they could move with such terrifying efficiency. All they knew now was that Earth was no longer a backward planet. It was something far more dangerous, something that would not forgive the centuries of oppression and control. And then, in the wreckage, a final message appeared, etched into the hull of the Admiral's flagship, written in a language only the humans could understand. "We've always been here. You just didn't see us." The Confederation's leadership, shaken by the events at Uwazkur, realized with growing horror that Earth had become something they could no longer understand, let alone control. The galaxy's once-ordered powers, led by centuries of calm diplomacy and overwhelming military force, now found themselves staring into the void of an unknown enemy. An enemy that knew their tactics better than they did. The Confederation's High Council met in secret, a rare occurrence that reflected the urgency of the situation. The chairperson, a multi-limbed being from the aquatic world of Erdath, spoke gravely to the assembly. "We cannot afford to underestimate the humans any longer. They have become a threat to our very existence. Our fleets are failing. We need a countermeasure, something to end this." For the first time, the Confederation's military strategists were forced to acknowledge the truth. They could no longer rely on their superior numbers or overwhelming firepower. These weren't the crude, chaotic human forces they had dismissed for so long. These humans had evolved, technologically and tactically, into something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The response from the Confederation was swift. They sent out the fleet's elite, the Omega Division, a group of the most formidable soldiers and officers the Confederation had ever trained. The Omega Division had been assembled for the sole purpose of handling the galaxy's most dangerous threats, and now it was humanity that was the target. They pursued Earth's elusive fleets across the stars, following reports from a dozen outposts that had been wiped out in the blink of an eye. But no matter how fast they moved, no matter how many routes they explored, they found no trace of the human attackers. The human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts, moving with uncanny precision, slipping through hyperspace corridors, and blurring in and out of reality itself. The Omega Division began to lose hope. They had once been the hunters. Now, they were the prey. Weeks passed with no progress, and the frustration of the commanders grew. Their orders were clear: capture the humans. Destroy them if necessary. Do whatever it takes to end this threat. But the humans weren't fighting conventionally. They weren't interested in destruction for its own sake. They were taking out Confederate systems, crippling their infrastructure, and vanishing into the unknown. On the outskirts of the Ralta Nebula, however, something changed. A single human ship was spotted. A small, unassuming vessel that seemed to be drifting in the void. No weapons were visible. No shields activated. It was an invitation, not an attack. The Omega Division's fleet descended upon it with deadly precision, confident that they had cornered their quarry. As they neared, the human ship's transmission came online. "We've been waiting for you." The transmission cut to static as the fleet was suddenly rocked by an energy pulse that sent shockwaves through their ships. One by one, the Omega Division's ships fell silent. They had walked straight into a trap. Humanity was hunting them now. The Confederation's elite fleet, shattered and disoriented, limped back from the trap in the Ralta Nebula. Their once immense pride was now a crumbling shell, and their sense of superiority was gone. They had been humbled, cornered by a force they couldn't understand. The very ships that once represented their unchallenged dominance now sat crippled and broken in the deepest corners of space, far from the reach of their commanders. For weeks, the Confederation struggled with their losses. The High Council convened again, but this time, they had no answers. There was no precedent for what was happening. They knew the humans had outgrown their primitive, volatile nature, but how had they become this? It was clear. The humans weren't simply defending their territory. They were reshaping the rules of warfare itself. Desperation led to the most unusual of diplomatic measures. In a bid to understand what was happening, a delegation of the highest-ranking Confederation officials, including the chairperson, boarded a specially crafted ship and headed directly to Earth. It was a final gamble, a diplomatic attempt to force the hand of the humans, to understand how they had evolved so quickly. When the ship entered Earth's orbit, the delegation was greeted not with chaos, but an eerie calm. There were no fleets, no signs of military presence, just the stark beauty of Earth's familiar continents, now bathed in peaceful sunlight. But beneath the surface of tranquility, something was different. There was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that the Confederation was walking into the lion's den without realizing it. Upon landing, the delegation was met by Ambassador Klein once again. She led them through corridors lined with sophisticated technology that surpassed even the Confederation's most advanced systems. The architecture was awe-inspiring. Buildings grown from living biomatter, massive city complexes that pulsed with integrated artificial intelligence, shimmering energy fields that powered everything from agriculture to space travel. Earth, it seemed, had not just survived. It had thrived in a way that was wholly unprecedented. "Welcome to Earth," Klein said coolly as they walked through the grand halls, her expression unreadable. The delegation was on edge, though none showed it outwardly. They had come expecting an explanation, some sort of diplomatic offering from the humans, but instead they were confronted with a reality they hadn't anticipated. Earth was not the decayed, battered world they had once believed it to be. It was a utopia, a civilization that had evolved into something greater than the sum of its parts, not in isolation, but as a reflection of every lesson humanity had learned from their oppression. The chairperson, ever the diplomat, attempted to remain calm. "Ambassador Klein, we're here to discuss a ceasefire. This cannot continue. You have no reason to pursue this path. Your people, our people," Klein interrupted, her voice firm, almost cold. "You're still trying to paint us as your victims, aren't you? But you've missed the point. Earth has never been your victim. We've been learning, adapting, evolving. And now, we're stronger than you could ever imagine." The chairperson hesitated, a knot forming in his stomach. "Then, what is it you want? To dominate the galaxy?" "We want recognition," she replied, her voice low but resolute. "We want you to understand that we are no longer the fragile creatures you once knew. You permitted us to leave. But mark this, Confederation. In doing so, you sealed your own fate." Ambassador Klein's words hung in the air like a threat, cold and sharp. The Confederation delegation, once so sure of their dominance, now found themselves scrambling to understand the enormity of what they were facing. The humans had not just evolved. They had transformed into something beyond the scope of their understanding. The technological marvels of Earth, the seamless integration of biology and machinery, were only the surface of an even deeper mystery. Klein led them to a vast chamber beneath the Earth's surface, hidden within one of the planet's major cities. The room was bathed in a soft, otherworldly light. In the center of the room stood an enormous holographic display, a map of the galaxy. But this was no ordinary map. It was alive, pulsating with streams of data, shifting constantly, as though the map itself was aware of the movements of fleets and the ebbs and flows of power throughout the galaxy. "This," Klein said, her voice soft but resolute, "is our new reality. The Confederation thought it had a monopoly on knowledge, but we've been studying you. All of you, every piece of your technology, your tactics, your weaknesses. And now, we're taking that knowledge and using it to rewrite the balance of the galaxy." The chairperson's heart raced as he stared at the holographic map. There, scattered among the stars, were dozens of Earth's ships, not just the ones that had struck with terrifying precision, but entire fleets, vast armadas that appeared out of nowhere. Human ships, sleek and almost invisible, were in places no Confederate fleet had ever ventured, quietly shadowing Confederate movements, disrupting supply lines, and sabotaging key installations. "You're building an empire," the chairperson finally said, his voice strained. "You're preparing for war. But why? We allowed you to leave. We offered you freedom." "Freedom," Klein echoed, an edge creeping into her tone. "You think freedom is what we've sought all this time? No. What you offered was nothing. A place at the bottom of your galaxy, scraping for scraps. You thought we were content to stay there, didn't you? You thought we'd wither away quietly in the dark." Her eyes narrowed as she looked at each of them, one by one. "No," she continued. "We were waiting, watching, gathering what we needed. And now, we will take what is ours." The chairperson, a seasoned politician who had navigated countless diplomatic crises, could feel the tide turning. Earth was no longer a small, insignificant world. It was an emerging superpower, one that had spent years quietly preparing for this moment. And now that moment had arrived. "You may have thought you were allowing us to depart," Klein said, her voice gaining power. "But in reality, you gave us the tools to rebuild. And now we will reshape the galaxy, on our terms, not yours." As the delegation stood in stunned silence, Klein took a slow, deliberate step forward. "The tide is turning, and this time, it's your turn to be swept away." The chairperson and his delegation left Earth's surface in silence, their minds heavy with the realization of how thoroughly they had underestimated humanity. Ambassador Klein's words echoed in their ears long after they had boarded their ship and set course back to the heart of the Confederation. Earth had not merely achieved a state of independence, it had cultivated a silent, insidious power, one that now towered over the rest of the galaxy, waiting for its moment to strike. But the Confederation had always prided itself on its ability to control the flow of events. It was true that they had been blind to humanity's evolution, but they still held the levers of power, didn't they? They still had their fleets, their vast military might. They would respond, and they would do so with overwhelming force. This was not the first time a subordinate species had overstepped its bounds. Back at the Confederation's core, the High Council convened once again. The chairperson, visibly shaken, addressed the assembly. "We've misjudged them. Earth has built an empire right under our noses, and now they intend to use it against us." There was no disagreement. The evidence was clear. Earth was no longer the backwater planet they had once dismissed. It was a threat, perhaps the greatest threat the Confederation had ever faced. The Council was divided, but there was no time for hesitation. It was agreed. An all-out offensive must be launched to suppress the rise of humanity before it became an existential risk. As the war machine of the Confederation began to mobilize, Earth watched quietly. The human fleets, hidden in plain sight across the galaxy, were ready. But this time, it was not just their ships that would stand in defiance. It was the very fabric of human society that had been transformed into something unrecognizable to the rest of the galaxy. Earth's power was not built solely on technology. It was rooted in the evolution of every facet of human life, in their ability to adapt, to think, to use their creativity and ingenuity in ways that no other species had ever done. Over the past few decades, Earth had established a network of influence, a silent web of control that reached across the Confederation's systems like tendrils of a forgotten god. For the first time in millennia, the Confederation was vulnerable. As their fleets gathered in a final show of force, they realized something was wrong. The orders to mobilize, the sensitive intelligence, the strategic reports, all of it had been compromised. Earth had been watching, infiltrating, and pulling the strings from the shadows. A sudden, violent shockwave rocked the council chamber, a ripple in hyperspace. The human fleets, once invisible, emerged from all directions in coordinated strikes. The Confederation's warships, supposedly the most formidable in the galaxy, were caught off guard. The tide had finally turned. Earth was no longer just surviving. It was hunting. And now, the Confederation would experience the true meaning of what it had allowed Earth to become. A species that had been underestimated, ignored, and ultimately unleashed. The battle erupted like a storm across the galaxy. The Confederation's fleets, massive and poised, launched their offensive with the confidence of a species that had never truly been challenged. They moved as one, a series of coordinated strikes intended to overwhelm Earth's fragmented forces. Yet, as the first wave of ships entered the star systems that had once been Earth's colonies, they met nothing but silence. The planets, the ships, the vast network of communications, all were eerily still, as though the galaxy had gone dead. Then, without warning, the ambush began. Earth's fleet, hidden in plain sight, materialized from every corner, every shadow of space. Stealth technology far beyond anything the Confederation had ever conceived flared to life. The human ships were everywhere, and the Confederation's advanced fleets were outmatched. For the first time, the Confederation's invincibility crumbled under the weight of humanity's newfound capabilities. The Confederation's warships, each a titan of firepower and technology, were torn apart by Earth's seemingly humble vessels, sleek and fast, using weapons that defied known science. Humans had unlocked the secrets of energy, gravity, and time itself. Their ships moved with an unnatural fluidity, slipping through hyperspace like phantoms. Confederate shields, once thought impenetrable, shattered under precise, almost surgical attacks. Weapons that twisted reality bent the very fabric of space, tearing through the hulls of the massive ships with terrifying efficiency. Admiral Koreth, once the Confederation's pride, found himself aboard a flagship that had once been the epitome of military might. Now, it was nothing more than a target in a hunt. The human ships moved in, a ring of destruction. The Admiral's desperate orders fell on deaf ears. The crew of his ship, once so loyal, now scrambled in futile panic. "You cannot outrun us," a voice came over the comms. It was calm, almost mocking. The voice of the humans they had long overlooked. Klein's voice, the last words the Admiral would ever hear. In the heart of the Confederation's capital, panic swept through the Council. Leaders who had once believed themselves untouchable now realized that their empire had no foundation left to stand on. Earth had infiltrated every system, every level of their command. Financial institutions crumbled. Military commands fell silent. The Confederation was fracturing from within, and it was humanity that had pulled the strings. The final blow came swiftly. Earth's fleets struck at the heart of the Confederation's remaining strongholds. The once proud fleets that had represented galactic superiority now lay in ruin, scattered across the stars. Each ship that fell was a symbol of the Confederation's failure to understand the species they had tried to control. As the last of the Confederate forces retreated into deep space, Earth's fleets held their position. The galaxy fell silent once again. But this time, the silence was not born of uncertainty. It was the quiet after the storm, the finality of a new order. Humanity had claimed its place in the stars. Ambassador Klein stood before the remains of the High Council, their once powerful empire now reduced to a fragmented remnant. "The tide has shifted," she said softly. "You permitted us to depart, and in doing so, you sealed your own fate." And with that, the Confederation, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, became a shadow of their former self. The galaxy now belonged to the Earthlings, and they would never forget the lesson they had taught.